My name is Sable Renwick. I am 36 years old. And for 30 years, my own mother introduced me to strangers as the plain one before she ever said my name. I used to think it was a joke. Then I turned 11 and realized nobody in my family was laughing with me. They were laughing at me, and I was just standing close enough to hear it. Last spring, at my cousin's engagement party, my Aunt Georgina walked a woman I'd never seen before straight up to me and said, word for word, "And this is the one we don't really talk about." 40-something people heard it. Forks stopped moving. Someone's champagne glass hovered halfway to their mouth. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was that the woman standing next to me wasn't a wedding guest at all. If you've ever been the one your family quietly stopped mentioning, stay with me. This story is for you. I want to go back to the beginning because you need to understand how deep it went before you'll understand how far I had to climb. I was 7 years old the first time I heard the word used as a fact instead of an insult. It was a Sunday. My mother was ironing dresses for the church picnic. One for my sister Marigold, one for our cousin Delphine, one for my aunt's foster daughter who'd only lived with us 4 months. 3 dresses, 3 girls, laid out on the bed like little soldiers. I stood in the doorway waiting for mine. It never came. "You don't need one, sweetheart," my mother said, not even looking up from the iron. "Marigold photographs well. You don't." I was 7. I didn't understand what photographs well meant. I understood the tone. I understood that whatever it meant, I didn't have it. That afternoon at the picnic, my Aunt Georgina cupped Marigold's chin in both hands and told a neighbor, "This one is going to break hearts." Then she looked at me, tilted her head like she was appraising a piece of furniture, and said to the same neighbor, "That one got the Renwick nose, poor thing." My mother heard it. She didn't correct her. She laughed, a short, easy laugh, like Georgina had just said something everyone already privately agreed on. I stood there in my hand-me-down dress, with a mustard stain on the collar that nobody had bothered to scrub out, because my mother said it wouldn't show up in pictures anyway. She was right. It didn't show up in pictures. Neither did I. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the unwanted one in a family. It isn't one big, cruel moment. It's an entire architecture built one small brick at a time, until one day you look up and realize you're standing inside a house that was built to keep you small. There was a talent show at my elementary school when I was 9. Every kid got to sign up for something. Marigold did a dance routine my mother rehearsed with her every night for 3 weeks, humming the music while she ironed, clapping out the counts. Julian built a working volcano that actually smoked, and my father helped him wire a tiny fan inside it so the smoke would drift instead of just puff. I asked if I could do something too. My mother looked at me for a long moment, the way you look at a math problem that doesn't quite add up, and said, "What would you even do, sweetheart?" Not cruel. Worse than cruel. Genuinely, sincerely confused that I might have something worth showing anyone. I didn't sign up. I sat in the audience instead and clapped until my palms stung, because that was the role I'd been assigned, and I was good at following a script even when nobody had bothered to write me a part in it. There was the year of the class photo when I was 12, and I'd finally saved enough of my own money to buy a headband I actually liked, pale blue, with a small fabric flower on the side. I wore it proudly to school picture day. When the photos came back, my mother ordered wallet-sized prints of Marigold's and Julian's for every relative's Christmas card.
She didn't order mine.
"You blinked in it," she said, which was true, and also completely beside the point, because there had been 3 other frames the photographer offered where I hadn't blinked at all, and she'd simply never asked to see them. The headband sat in a drawer for 2 years before I finally threw it away. I remember doing it deliberately, almost ceremonially, like I was closing a small door somewhere inside myself. And there was the Sunday my grandfather, my mother's father, a quiet, unhurried man who smelled like pipe tobacco and cedar, pulled me aside after dinner and pressed an old film camera into my hands. "Your grandmother used to say the camera never lies," he told me, "but I think the truth is, it only shows you what people bother to point it at." I didn't understand him then. I understood him completely, years later, standing in an attic holding a green sketchbook that explained everything. He died the winter I turned 17, and at his funeral, my mother stood at the podium and talked for 6 minutes about how much he'd loved Marigold's laugh and Julian's curiosity. She didn't mention me once. I sat in the second pew in a black dress that wasn't new, holding his camera in my lap like a secret, and I made myself a quiet promise that day. I promised myself I would use it until it stopped being a secret at all. The house had a wall of photographs in the hallway. 16 frames. Marigold was in 14 of them. My brother Julian, the smart one, the one whose science fair trophies got their own shelf, was in 8. I was in 2. In the first, I'm half hidden behind a cousin's shoulder. In the second, half my face is cut off by the edge of the frame, and the half that remains is turned away from the camera, like even at 6 years old some part of me already understood I wasn't supposed to be looking back. My birthday cake every year said Happy Birthday Julian and Sable, my name always added underneath in smaller icing like a footnote somebody remembered at the last second. At my high school graduation, I graduated top of my class, by the way, with a scholarship offer already in hand. My mother took exactly 1 photograph. The ceremony lasted 2 hours. 1 photograph. That was the summer I bought a disposable camera with my own babysitting money and started documenting my own life because I understood, somewhere quiet and cold in my chest, that if I didn't do it, no one else was going to. I kept the photographs in a shoebox under my bed. When nobody photographs you, you learn to become your own witness. I had been disappearing for a long time, and I decided I was done doing it quietly. I left home at 18 with a scholarship to study environmental science and a second-hand camera my grandfather had given me the year before he died, the only person in that house who ever looked at me like I was worth remembering. My mother's reaction to the scholarship was 2 sentences long. That's not a real career. You should study something practical, like your sister. My father drove me to campus. 3.5 hours, mostly silent. When we unloaded my 1 suitcase at the curb, he said something I carried with me for the next 18 years. Go build something they can't ignore. 6 words. The only real advice he ever gave me in my whole life. So I built. I started small, photographing injured wildlife for a rescue center that couldn't afford a real photographer. Then a local paper picked up one of my shots of an oil spill cleanup, and it went further than anyone expected. By 24, I was spending months at a time on a remote research station documenting a coral reef that a mining company wanted to dredge for construction sand. My photographs, 3 years of patient, unglamorous, freezing cold water work, ended up in front of an international court. The reef is still there today, 400 acres of it, because of images nobody in my family ever saw. I didn't publish under my own name. That wasn't false modesty. It was self-protection. I'd spent my whole childhood being told my face didn't belong in the picture, so I made sure it never had to be. I worked under a pen name, The Quiet Eye, and let the work speak instead of me. By the time I was 30, The Quiet Eye had exhibited in 4 countries, and almost nobody outside a small circle of editors and conservationists knew my actual name was Sable Renwick. The years between 24 and 32 were the loneliest and most alive I have ever felt. I lived out of duffel bags. I learned to sleep in the backs of trucks, on research boats, on the cots of field stations with generators that cut out at midnight. I got a parasite in Belize that put me in a hospital bed for 4 days, and the only person I called was my father because I knew if I called my mother, the first thing out of her mouth would somehow, impossibly, become about Marigold's wedding planning. I was right. I found out later, she told people I'd gone off to play with cameras somewhere. I missed 2 of Julian's promotions and 1 of Marigold's baby showers because I was 3 days by boat from the nearest airport, documenting a mangrove system nobody in Washington believed was worth protecting until my photographs proved otherwise. I wasn't there for the family. But I want to be honest with you, for a long time, the family wasn't why I was building anything at all. I built because it was the only place I'd ever felt like the space around me had been made on purpose, instead of despite me. There was a night on a research vessel off the coast of a small volcanic island, maybe 27 years old, sitting on deck with a cup of instant coffee gone cold in my hands, watching a marine biologist named Priya tag a sea turtle under a string of solar lights. She looked over at me and said, completely offhand, "You've got a good eye. You ever think about doing this full-time instead of freelancing between other people's grants?" Nobody in my life had ever said something like that to me so simply, without a comparison attached, without a "but your sister" folded in somewhere at the end. I went back to my bunk that night and cried in a way I hadn't since I was a child, not from sadness exactly, but from the strange, disorienting relief of being seen by someone who had absolutely nothing to gain from flattering me. 6 months later, I quit the freelance grant work and committed to the reef documentation full-time. It became the project that would define the next 3 years of my life, and eventually, without my ever intending it to, the project that would walk back into that backyard in the form of a woman named Elena Cross. My family had no idea. I'd stopped telling them anything real years earlier, ever since the Thanksgiving I mentioned, carefully, hopefully, that one of my reef photographs had just been published internationally. My mother's response, without looking up from her plate, was, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Marigold just got promoted to regional manager?" I stopped bringing it up after that.
Some doors you don't need to keep knocking on.
You just build your own house instead. There was a moment a few years back that explained everything to me, the whole architecture, the whole reason the house had been built the way it was. I came home earlier than expected one visit and went up into the attic looking for an old coat. Behind a stack of storage bins, pushed into the farthest, dustiest corner, I found a box with masking tape on the side that said, in my mother's handwriting, college. Inside was a sketchbook, its green cover soft with age. I opened it expecting nothing. Instead, I found birds.
Dozens of them.
Studies of wings mid-flight, feather structure rendered in obsessive, loving detail, notes in the margins about light and shadow and anatomy. They weren't hobbyist doodles. They were good. Genuinely, professionally good. My mother had been an art student, a talented one. She'd left the program at 19, pregnant with Marigold, and never picked up a pencil again. I understood something then that I couldn't have explained out loud for years afterward. Every time I talked about my work, my mother wasn't hearing her daughter's achievement. She was looking into a mirror she'd spent her whole adult life avoiding. It didn't excuse what she'd done to me, but it explained the shape of it. I put the sketchbook back exactly where I found it. I never told her I'd seen it. 6 months before the reunion that changed everything, my father had a stroke. I drove 4 hours straight through the night to the hospital. When I walked in, my mother looked up and said, with real surprise in her voice, "Oh, you came." Not warmth.
Surprise.
As if my showing up for my own father was the unexpected part. I stayed 3 days. While my father slept, I found a thick folder in the bottom drawer of his desk, held together with a rubber band gone brittle with age. Inside were newspaper clippings, magazine printouts, every piece of press the quiet eye had ever received, going back 8 years. Some of the printouts had URLs so long he must have typed them out character by character on his slow old desktop computer, one painstaking letter at a time. He had never told my mother. He'd hidden 8 years of quiet, devoted proof underneath his tax returns. He caught me holding the folder from the doorway of his room.
He looked at it. He looked at me.
He nodded once and never said a word about it.
He didn't need to.
He'd kept the receipts. There was one more thing in that drawer, tucked beneath the folder, that I didn't understand until much later. A single sheet of letterhead from a law office 2 counties over, dated almost a decade earlier, the year my grandmother passed. I only had time to read the first line before I heard my mother's footsteps on the stairs and slid the drawer shut. It mentioned a parcel of land, the old orchard property my grandmother used to take me to, the one nobody else in the family ever wanted to visit because there was nothing to do there. I didn't think much of it at the time. I had a father to sit with and a folder full of 8 years of his quiet devotion still warm in my hands. I didn't think about that letter again until months later, and when I finally did, it would turn out to be the second to last thing my family ever expected to learn about me. I should also tell you about my cousin Delphine's youngest, a bright, anxious kid named Toby who'd been quietly falling behind in school because nobody at home had the money or the bandwidth to get him the tutoring he needed. I'd been sending an anonymous monthly transfer to his school's financial aid office for almost 3 years by the time of that reunion, routed through a scholarship fund with a name that had nothing to do with mine. Nobody knew. I never wanted them to. It wasn't a gift I was keeping score of. It was just the quiet, private opposite of everything that had been done to me, proof to myself, if no one else, that I had become someone who built people up instead of someone who tore them down for sport. I mention it now only because of what happened later that same evening, in the strangest, quietest twist of the entire day. The family reunion happened that July, the kind of heat that makes the air look like it's shivering. My mother insisted on keeping the tradition alive, not because she loved tradition, I'd come to understand, but because she loved having a stage. I hadn't gone in 2 years. I went this time for my father. The stroke had slowed him down. He walked with a cane now. He'd asked me to come. I said yes. What none of us knew was that something else had been quietly building for months. An editor named Elena Cross had been writing to me about a feature profile. The first time in 8 years I'd agreed to let my real name appear next to my work. In one email, I mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that I'd be in my hometown for a family event, and that there was an old restored railway depot nearby worth seeing if she was ever in the area. If you're ever passing through, I wrote. I might just do that, she wrote back. I'd invited her to see a building, not to meet my family. That distinction mattered, right up until it stopped mattering at all. I arrived at noon. The backyard was already full. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes just counting my own breaths before I made myself go in. The greetings told you everything you needed to know about where you stood in that family. Marigold arrived and the whole yard lit up. Hugs, exclamations, my mother hoisting her youngest grandchild onto her hip and smiling for an audience that wasn't even watching yet. I walked into nods. Oh, hi, Sable. My Aunt Georgina didn't even look up from the serving dish she was arranging. My mother saw me, paused a half-second too long, and said, "Oh, Sable. You made it. I wasn't sure you'd come." The exact tone you'd use welcoming a neighbor who'd wandered onto your property by mistake. I found my father under the big oak tree at the edge of the yard, away from the noise. I sat beside him. He squeezed my hand. Neither of us needed words for that part. Near the entrance there was a table of name tags for every guest. Every guest but one. There was a blank one waiting, with a marker beside it. I wrote my own name. 42 people at that reunion. I was the only one who had to write her own name onto a sticker, like a stranger walking into the wrong building. My mother had arranged the head table with place cards and her own careful handwriting. Diane, Gerald, Marigold, Marcus, Georgina, Raymond. My name wasn't on a single table. The unspoken expectation was that I'd find a seat at the kids' table, the one with sticky fingers and legs too short to reach the ground. So that's where I sat. I ate quietly and watched a choreography I'd been watching for 34 years. Same roles, same script, same silence I'd learned to wear like a second skin. A little girl at the kids' table, one of Marigold's twins, offered me half her peanut butter sandwich without being asked, in the unthinking, generous way small children do before anyone teaches them who is and isn't worth sharing with. I told her thank you, and meant it more than she could have known. Across the yard, I watched my mother move from cluster to cluster, refilling glasses, laughing at jokes, touching elbows, performing the role of matriarch with a warmth she had never once, in 34 years, extended to me directly. I watched Georgina hold court near the dessert table, recycling the same 3 family anecdotes she trotted out at every gathering, none of which ever mentioned me, as though I'd simply never been present for any of it. Not my own childhood, not my own life. I thought, sitting there with sticky picnic table varnish under my elbows, about how strange it was that I'd flown in a plane over reefs no other human being had photographed, that I'd stood in courtrooms testifying about limestone load-bearing structures, that I had, by any reasonable measure, built an entire life out of nothing but a second-hand camera and my father's 6 words, and none of it mattered here. In this yard, under this particular sun, I was still just the one who didn't get a place card. What I didn't know was that someone else was about to watch it too. After lunch, someone dragged out the old photo albums, and the afternoon turned into a chorus of nostalgia. Marigold's pageant wins, Julian science fairs, family trips where everyone was smiling at the exact same camera. I counted through 3 albums, close to 200 photographs. I appeared in 6 of them, always at the edge of the frame, half cut, half hidden. In the one I searched hardest for, I was 10 years old, standing behind a flower pot at a barbecue. Nobody looking at me at all. I slid that photograph out of its sleeve and put it in my pocket. I needed air. In my grandmother's old sewing room, in a box marked in my father's handwriting, I found photographs from my university graduation. 17 of them. My mother had taken one. My father had taken 17. Me crossing the stage. Me holding the diploma. Me alone, looking straight into the lens, my face open and unguarded in a way it almost never was around that family. On the back of the envelope, in his handwriting, Sable's big day. I tucked those into my pocket too, next to the photo of the 10-year-old behind the flower pot, and walked back outside. The afternoon had softened into that gold hour before evening. An unfamiliar car turned up the gravel drive. A woman in her 50s stepped out, a linen blazer over a white blouse, dark trousers, a leather bag full of documents. She looked at the backyard the way you look at a room you didn't expect to be walking into. It was Elena Cross. She'd driven 90 minutes from her hotel. Sable, you actually came, she said, walking over.
I told you I would, I said.
I brought the layout proofs for the piece. If this is a bad time, I can come back. I looked out at the yard. My mother rearranging the dessert table. Marigold taking selfies. Georgina refilling her wine. It's always a bad time here, I said. Come on. I took her to the kids' table.
We sat down.
She laid out printed photographs across the paper tablecloth, full color, high resolution. The courthouse restoration. The library. The reef from above, from below, from 100 careful angles across 3 patient years. She sat at the kids' table with me, the first person at that reunion, whoever chose to. It took my Aunt Georgina exactly 12 minutes to notice something had drifted off script. She had a radar for it. She came over, drink in hand, smile already deployed. Hi there, are you a friend of somebody's? I opened my mouth to answer. Georgina didn't let me finish. She turned to Elena instead, tilted her head, and delivered the line she'd clearly polished over years of repeated use. This is the one we don't really talk about. She said it with a conspiratorial little laugh, like she was sharing an amusing family quirk, like it was charming. Elena's face went very still. Not angry. Still, like a camera lens right before the shutter drops.
I'm sorry, she said.
What did you say? Georgina, undeterred, went further, because she always went further. Oh, it's just a family thing. Every family's got one, the quiet one, the plain one. She waved her hand, that same dismissive little flick I'd been watching since I was 6 years old. Elena didn't laugh. She set down her coffee cup slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they've just made a decision. My mother appeared at the edge of the conversation. Who's your friend, Sable? The word friend was carrying the full weight of suspicion. I opened my mouth again. Elena spoke first. I'll introduce myself properly in just a moment, if that's all right. I'd like to wait until everyone's listening. The air in that yard shifted. She leaned toward me. Is this okay? Do I have your permission? They won't care, I said. I'm not asking if they'll care. I'm asking if you're giving me permission. I looked out at the yard, my father under his tree, my mother trimming the edge of the grass with the precision of someone who needed to control everything within reach. 30 years of this. 34 of them stitched to the wrong story. I nodded, once. Elena stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked toward the head table with the calm of a woman who had spent her career addressing rooms full of strangers. Excuse me, she said. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just clear enough to make people turn. The yard went quiet in layers. Somebody turned down the speaker. 42 people turned to look at a woman they'd never met. I know this is a family gathering, and I apologize for the interruption, but could I have everyone's attention for just a moment? My mother's smile froze in place. Georgina set down her glass. Elena pulled a business card from her pocket and handed it to my mother. My name is Elena Cross. I'm the editor-in-chief of a national conservation and design publication.
A pause.
My mother turned the card over, looked at it, looked up again. I drove 90 minutes to be here today. Not for the reunion. And then she said the 7 words that rewrote 34 years of labels in one breath. I'm here for her. She pointed toward me. Not dramatically. Just a simple, open palm gesture. The way you identify someone. Factual. Certain. The yard went completely silent. Elena opened her bag and held up the first printed photograph, the courthouse restoration, late afternoon light on limestone. This building was scheduled for demolition 3 years ago. Sable's photographic documentation, submitted as part of the preservation case, is the reason it's still standing. She held up the second. This was her first major published project. She was 24. She held up a third. The reef, sunlight fracturing through blue water onto living coral. This reef would be gone. 400 acres. It isn't, because of 3 years of work almost nobody in this yard has ever seen. She spread the photographs across the picnic table, one after another, until they covered the whole surface. My mother stared at them like someone had set down objects from another planet. Marigold's phone sat face down on the table for the first time all day. Elena looked at my mother, then at Georgina, then slowly around the whole yard, table by table, face by face. Sable Renwick is one of the most respected conservation photographers working today. Her work has appeared in publications across 4 countries. She's directly responsible for saving 11 historic and ecological sites. She let that land for a second. And she's your daughter. A pause. I assumed you knew. 5 words. The most polite devastation I have ever witnessed in my life. No malice in her voice. Just plain, professional clarity, laid down like a foundation stone. Georgina's glass hit the table. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. My mother recovered first. Decades of managing the family narrative had built a reflex faster than honesty. Well, of course we knew, she said, too brightly. We've always been so proud of Sable. She smiled. The smile never reached her eyes. It stopped somewhere around her cheekbones and stayed there, stranded. I said nothing. I just watched my mother lie to a yard full of people who had watched her diminish me for 3 decades. Nobody looked surprised. They were used to it. This was just a new performance of the same old show. Georgina pivoted next. I was only teasing. Sable knows I adore her. She reached for my arm. I stepped back, not dramatically, just enough that her hand closed on empty air. Marigold crossed her arms. I mean, we knew she did restoration stuff. She never really talked about it much. The universal posture of someone rewriting history in real time. From across the yard, my Uncle Raymond set down his plate. He was looking at me, not at my mother, not at Georgina.
Me.
My cousin's daughter, 16 years old, ran over from the sprinkler, hair dripping. She looked at the photographs, then at me. Wait, Aunt Sable, they used your pictures to save a whole reef? I smiled. The first real smile of the day. That's right. That's incredible, she said, simple and honest, and the contrast between her and every adult in that yard was almost unbearable. My mother found me by the kitchen door later, once the attention had scattered the way it always did. She'd waited, the way she always waited, saving the worst conversations for the moments nobody could verify what she said. Why would you do this? Why bring a stranger here to embarrass me? I didn't bring her to embarrass anyone, I said. She came because she thinks my work matters. Do you know what I sacrificed so you could go to that school? You sacrificed your art program when you got pregnant with Marigold, I said. I know. I found your sketchbook. The color drained from her face all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth moved. No sound came out for 3 full seconds. That is not your business. You're talented, Mom. You really are. I kept my voice even. But that's not my fault. There was no script for that. No deflection that could absorb the plain fact that her daughter had seen her talent and refused to apologize for having inherited it. She turned and walked toward the bathroom. I heard the lock click. The woman who had spent 34 years making me invisible had just made herself disappear instead. Marigold found me on the porch. You could have told us about your projects, you know. I did. 2 Thanksgivings ago. You called it a hobby. She blinked. The memory was buried under 2 years of granite countertops and promotions. I didn't realize it was that big. That's the point. You never asked why you have to make everything about you. I said, and let the sentence sit in the air. You had 36 years of everything revolving around you. I'm allowed one afternoon. She turned and walked back inside. My brother Julian found me last, standing near the driveway with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man doing long division in his head. I didn't know, he said, quieter than I'd heard him speak in years. I mean, I knew you did photography. I didn't know it was this. Would it have mattered if you had? I asked, not unkindly, just honestly. He didn't answer right away, and I respected that more than if he'd rushed to defend himself. I don't know, he finally admitted. I think I stopped looking a long time ago because it was easier than noticing what wasn't fair. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was the first true sentence anyone in my family had said to me all day, and I held on to it the way you hold on to the one clean thing in a room that's otherwise a mess. It was my Uncle Raymond, of all people, who pulled me aside just before I left, pressing an old, yellowed envelope into my hand. Your grandmother left me in charge of this if anything ever happened before you turned 35, he said. She made me promise not to say a word unless you'd made something of yourself first.
Said she'd know it when she saw it.
I think today counts. Inside was a copy of the letter I'd glimpsed in my father's drawer months earlier, the old orchard property, 22 acres my grandmother had quietly willed to me alone, kept separate from the rest of the estate, held in trust until a lawyer or a family member judged the moment right. My grandmother, the one who never once called me plain, who never compared me to my sister, who used to walk me through that orchard telling me the name of every bird we passed, she had seen something in me decades before anyone else bothered to look. She'd simply waited for the world to catch up to her opinion of me. I stood in that driveway holding two pieces of paper that together undid almost everything I thought I understood about how invisible I'd actually been. I hadn't been invisible to everyone, just to the people closest to me. My father was still under the oak tree. He hadn't moved through any of it. His eyes were wet. I pulled a chair close, sat down, took his hand, the one with the slight curl the stroke had left behind. His chin trembled. I found the folder, Dad. 8 years of clippings in your desk. His chin trembled harder. 3 seconds of silence in a voice I had to lean in to hear. I should have said something. I pulled the photograph from my pocket. The university graduation, me at 22 in cap and gown, radiant, looking straight into the camera, a face that wasn't plain, a face that was proud. You took 15 photos that day, Dad. I should have taken more, he said, his voice breaking. I should have fought harder for you. You kept the receipts, Dad. I placed the photograph in his hand. He held it the way you hold something fragile. Put this one in the living room. Not in a box. He looked at it a long moment, thumb moving slowly over the glossy surface, and nodded, full of everything he'd never said out loud. My mother crossed the yard like a storm you can see coming from a long way off. Jaw tight, steps hard on the grass. Sable Diane Renwick. You come to my family reunion and bring a stranger to humiliate me? I stood, hands at my sides, voice steady. Nobody humiliated you. Elena came to talk about my work. Everything you have because I raised you, fed you, clothed you. You clothed Marigold. I got what was left over. I treated you all the same, she said, loud enough for the yard to hear. The biggest lie in our family's history, repeated so many times she'd probably started believing it herself. There are 3 photographs of me on that hallway wall. 14 of Marigold. You didn't treat us the same. Her voice rose, shaking. You were always so difficult. Always making everything about yourself. I let the accusation pass through me like wind through an open window. I'd heard it 1,000 times. It didn't land anymore. I didn't put the label on myself, Mom. You did. And you made sure everyone else knew it too. The yard was silent. 40 people heard it. Nobody moved. My mother crumbled, not into remorse, into self-pity. After everything I've sacrificed, this is how you repay me. I'm not repaying anything, I said. I'm leaving. My voice hadn't risen once through any of it. She was the one shaking. She was the one raising her voice. I was still. I turned and walked across the yard. The grass was soft under my shoes. The light had turned amber, that late hour when everything looks kinder than it actually is. I got in my car. The manila envelope with Elena's formal offer sat on the passenger seat, the graduation photograph resting on top of it, the copy my father had insisted I keep. One for me, one for him. A quiet pact between two quiet people. I pulled out onto the gravel drive. I didn't check the mirror. The highway stretched ahead of me, straight and empty, the way only summer roads are at the end of the day. I drove with the windows down. No radio. The wind was enough. The silence was enough. 50 miles out, my phone buzzed. A text from my father. 2 words. Always proud. I pulled onto the shoulder. Read it twice. The screen blurred for a moment, and I realized my eyes had gone wet. I wiped them with the back of my hand, set the phone in the cup holder, and kept driving. 90 miles out, I passed an old, forgotten building at the edge of the highway, a gas station nobody had used in decades, boards over the windows, vines climbing the roofline, weeds cracking through the pavement. The kind of building most people drive past without a second glance. I slowed down and studied it, the roofline, the window frames, the good bones hiding underneath all that neglect. I smiled. That one might be worth saving. And I kept driving. 3 months later, the feature ran. My face was on the cover. The same face my family had called plain for 34 years, on the cover of a national magazine, standing in front of the courthouse I'd restored, not smiling, not posing, just standing there, looking straight into the lens.
Present. Certain.
Here. My father framed the cover and hung it in the living room. My mother never took it down. She never acknowledged it either. It just hung there, a quiet fact in a house that had spent decades avoiding facts about me. That autumn, I drove out to that old gas station and walked its walls. The following week, I submitted a restoration proposal, a community space, free of charge. A building nobody looked at twice, in a town everybody drove straight through.
I knew something about that.
I also finally went out to the orchard. 22 acres, gone half wild with neglect, the old farmhouse sagging gently at one corner like it was tired of standing alone. I walked the rows of trees my grandmother used to walk me through, naming birds, and I understood, standing there in the tall grass, that she hadn't just left me land. She'd left me the one piece of proof I would ever need that someone in that family had truly seen me all along, even when she never said it out loud. I'm restoring the farmhouse now, slowly, the way I restore everything, patiently, one honest repair at a time, refusing to rush anything just to make it look finished before it actually is. A few weeks after the reunion, a woman from the scholarship office called Delphine to ask a routine verification question about her son Toby's continued eligibility. Delphine, confused, asked who exactly had been funding it all this time, since she'd always assumed it was some general district program. The woman on the phone, not knowing any better, read off the name attached to the fund. Delphine called me that same night, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard from her before. "Was that you? This whole time, was that you?" I didn't deny it. There didn't seem to be any point anymore in staying hidden about the good things, only the bad ones. She cried on the phone for a long time, and for the first time in my life, someone in my family looked at me and saw something other than a comparison to somebody else. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked. "Because I didn't do it to be seen," I told her. "I did it because somebody should have done it for me, and nobody ever did." In my studio, I opened the old shoebox from under my childhood bed. I added the magazine cover, the photograph of the gas station before its restoration, the copy of my grandmother's letter, and one more, the picture of me at 10 years old, hiding behind a flower pot, nobody looking at all. I held it up next to the magazine cover. A woman of 36, everyone looking now. "Same girl," I said to the empty room. "Same girl. My mother and I speak occasionally now. Careful, brief conversations, mostly about my father's recovery, mostly free of the old cruelty, though never quite warm either. I've stopped waiting for an apology that I've come to understand may simply never arrive, and stranger still, I've stopped needing it to. Some people can only ever meet you as far as they've been willing to travel inside themselves, and my mother, for all her sharp edges, never once made that whole journey. I've made my peace with loving her from a careful distance instead of an unguarded one. It isn't everything, But it's honest, and after 34 years of performances, honest was worth more to me than almost anything else she could have offered. Here's what I've come to understand, and it's the only piece of this I'd ask you to carry with you. You cannot restore a family that doesn't want to be repaired, but you can build a life that doesn't need their approval to stay standing. Every building worth saving started the exact same way. Somebody said it was worthless, and then somebody else looked closer and saw what it could still become. Sometimes that somebody is a stranger with a business card. Sometimes it's a grandmother who never said a word until she absolutely had to. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and stubborn enough, that somebody ends up being you. I was never the plain one. I was just standing in the wrong room, in front of the wrong people for far too long. The moment I stopped needing them to see me was the moment I finally started to see myself. And that, more than any magazine cover or courthouse or 22 acres of orchard, is the thing I'd ask you to hold on to if this story found you at the right moment. If this reminded you of your own family, send it to someone who needs to hear it. And if you were ever the one nobody photographed, I see you. That's enough to start with.